Exactly how many Filipinos are engaged in the sex industry is hard to ascertain. For example, in a 1998 study by the International Labor Organization, it was estimated that there were at least 500,000 prostituted persons in the Philippines. In 2002, University of the Philippines Population Institute and Demographic Research and Development Foundation conducted a study. It found that 19% of young males paid for sex. Also, 11% received payment for sexual favors. Meanwhile, in a 2009 study, the estimated number of persons engaged in prostitution was around 800,000. But no matter the actual number, it is said that prostitution may be illegal, but it is tolerated in the Philippines. On one hand, there are laws penalizing prostitution. For example, Article 202 of the Revised Penal Code, as amended by the Republic Act No. 10158, penalizes women who engage in prostitution. It specifically states that women who, for money or profit, habitually indulge in sexual intercourse or lascivious conduct may be fined or imprisoned, or both. But on the other hand, local government units issue pink cards to masseurs and masseuses offering extra services. Karaoke bars have GROs offering more than customer support, and even the Bureau of Internal Revenue wants to tax those who sell sex-related services online. Obviously, there are layers of issues here. Is everyone in the sex industry prostituted? Are all sex workers in need of saving? Should sex work be legalized? Why is this also an LGBTQIA issue? And so we try to talk about this here at Baghari Talks. Kasama natin ngayon si Ms. Eda Catabas, member of the Trans Women's Group of Shobushka, or the Philippine Sex Workers Collective. Let me ask you this. When talking about the sex industry in the Philippines, many people assume that everyone involved in it are prostitutes. Is this a fair grouping?
Kung sex worker ka or if you're someone who works in the sex industry, it is common na people will automatically label you as prostitute. Iba kasi yung pagkaintindi ko when you say prostitute from sex worker. I think that marami pang chances and opportunities for Filipino people to really talk about ano ba talaga ang meaning ng prostitute, ano ba talaga ang meaning ng sex worker, kasi never siyang formally napag-usapan. Sex work is a taboo topic in the Philippines, and because of that, I never nagkaroon ng formal discussions para mas tumaas ang level of awareness natin sa ganitong work. So never siya nagkaroon ng cultural definition. What really is sex work, what really is prostitute, what it is really if you say someone into transactional sex or someone in a sex work industry. So these definitions can be interpreted by many people in many different ways.
Also, when talking about sex workers in the Philippines, there seems to be this mentality of these people do not know what they are doing, they need to be saved. Let me quote the Philippine Commission on Women, which recommended for the establishment of support mechanisms for prostituted persons to get out of the system of prostitution. Do you think this way of seeing the sex industry as having a homogeneous population is good or bad?
I would say it's a bad perspective. Tapos, I think that it's dangerous to the human rights of a sex worker kung mag-i-impose or magbibigay ka ng label sa kanya without a clear definition. Again, never nagkaroon here in the Philippines to legally or formally talk about sex work. So, hindi tayo nagkaroon ng ganung opportunities, but yet we have these labels already. And then we label everyone na involved sa sex industry as prostitute, for example. And I think that is unfair. It is not fair because how can you impose a label to someone when in the first place, you are not clearly defining kung ano yung label mo. So I don't think it's fair, and people might not understand this, but ang daming negative issues na nakakabit because of that concept. No, it is not healthy to the well-being of sex workers, especially mentally or sa mental health din. Because, for example, the label saying prostitute ka, alam na natin na ang daming negative um, implications kapag nag-identify ka with that label. Because number one, especially here in the Philippines, majority will tell you that it's immoral, bastos, or it's not a real work. It's not a work that you should be proud of, regardless kung anong klaseng effort or level of hard work na in-exert mo. You cannot be proud of the products of that work. For example, nakabili ka ng bahay, napag-aral mo yung mga kapatid mo, naging breadwinner ka, pinapakain mo yung relatives mo. But you should just shut up and don't talk about the fruit of your labor. Kahit pa naging engineer or naging doktor yung pinag-aral mong kapatid because of sex work, you should not be proud of yourself. So meron siyang ganung mga factors na nakakita ko as someone who had an experience with sex work and being with so many sex workers.
So for you, how should we define sex work?
Sex work for me is working just like any other works. But the nature of your work is just through sex. No, it can be yung traditional definition natin ng sex na you meet that person and then you go somewhere, you have a venue and then you do sex. Merong, maybe foreplays, penetration, basta ganung concept. And then also, kasi nga nasa digital age na tayo, meron din tinatawag na cybersex. And many people are earning from it, may it be yung tinatawag natin porn star, or someone na nag-offer ng mga cybersex shows in exchange of money, or transactional sex in nature siya, but then medyo nag-adjust lang siya sa online or digital platform, kaya ang tawag sa kanila is sex. So ang daming kinds of sex work actually. It's not just the traditional ones that we know or we are aware of.
So what rights of sex workers should we push for?
Because of the social-cultural factors, specifically dahil sinasabi ng mga Filipinos na immoral ang sex work, and many Filipinos are claiming that they are conservative and religious. Ang daming mga rights, not just because sex worker siya, but ang dami niyang rights as a human being na hindi niya na-exercise ng maayos. For example, the basic right to access education. Diba? Ang daming working students and people are just okay kung kahit ano pa yung work mo, and they will salute you for that kasi nga you are considered na hardworking, ikaw ay nagtatrabaho at the same time nag-aaral. But regardless of that work, carry lang. And people will still commend you for that. But when you, for example, nagsi-sex work ka, kasi gusto mong mag-study, hindi ka magiging proud. Also, dapat i-push ng mga sex workers ang kanilang right to access quality healthcare services. Kasi nga, the nature of its work, having sex, it makes you vulnerable to HIV and other sexually transmitted infections. That's the nature ng work. But because you will not be comfortable in going to a healthcare facility and tell them that you're a sex worker, yun ay malaking barrier na naghihinder sa iyo to enjoy your basic human rights, which is access to quality health services. And that is dangerous. No, that can cost your life even. That can even cost your life if you cannot access to a healthcare service. Even the right for you to just do what you want, yung freedom of expression. You're not allowed to exercise that right as well. Kung gusto mong sabihin, when I grow up, or I'm so comfortable and I'm so passionate with this work or being a sex worker kasi ito yung gusto ko as a sexually active person. Na-enjoy ko yung pagiging super sexually active, but at the same time, I'm earning from it. Diba? I mean, there are so many things that naghihinder sa iyo para ma-enjoy mo yung pagkatao just because you're a sex worker.
For you, is legalization of sex work the answer?
Yes. I think that the legalization of sex work is the answer para ma-address ang mga specific issues ng mga sex workers, especially when it comes to accessing or a basic right to access quality health services. Laws actually are just so powerful. They will condition minds of citizens. When a certain law is telling you to do this, whether you like it or not, you need to follow that law. Kasi if you do not follow that law, meron niyang mga consequences. That action has consequences that you need to pagbayaran mo kasi hindi ka nag-abide sa isang national. So imagine if you legalize sex work, it means that you are telling people that legally it's okay to do that job. And there is no problem. In effect, magiging mas welcoming yung mga service providers, especially sa healthcare industry. No, magiging welcoming sila. Kasi nga, there's nothing wrong with your work. Even your country is telling the people, the citizens, it is legal. It is okay. You can be that worker. You can do that. And we will not, hindi ka namin paparusahan just because of that.
How do we affect cultural change to make sex work more acceptable?
When it comes to cultural naman, I think that powerful din ang having laws that will ensure na protected ang rights or ang human rights ng mga sex workers. Even, there's something about law na it can really change mindset of people kahit pa yung mga traditional, kahit pa cultural. There's really something about laws, no? Na when it is being enforced to everyone, hindi man siya ma-change yung mindset mo ngayon. In the long run, as long as that law is existing and running, na-change mo slowly ang culture. Kasi culture is actually very difficult to change. Especially if it's been practiced since, I don't know, thousands of years ago, hundreds of years ago. So ang hirap talaga. But again, laws have the power to change that. Maybe not now, maybe not tomorrow, not in the near future. But as long as that law is still existing and running, eventually, magkakaroon talaga ng mga big changes.
In a way, sex-related work is already tolerated in the Philippines. For example, we have local government units granting licenses to massage parlors that we know offer extra services. The same local government units provide pink cards to the masseurs. We have GROs in karaoke bars. We have people selling sexual content online. So for you, is the moral outrage about sex work hypocritical?
The moral outrage for me is hypocritical in nature. Kasi sex work is being tolerated in the Philippines. And that is the reality. Ang daming sex workers. For example, yung nakwento mo, Sure, GROs, we have clubs and bars here in the Philippines na merong sex work. It is hypocrite in a way kasi binibigyan nga ng mga, for example, yung mga social hygiene clinics, meron silang mga ongoing interventions or initiatives to help sex workers in bars and clubs na maka-access pa rin ng mga healthcare services. No? That initiative is specific talaga sa mga sex workers. So, the government is actually tolerating and doing something about it. But then nationally, ay ayaw pag-usapan, ayaw siyang i-formalize yung ginagawa nila on the grounds in many LGUs. I'm not sure many, but I would say in some LGUs. If a certain government body is already doing something like this, why not formalize it or bring it to the national level? Kasi it will help sex workers. For example, in this case, access to healthcare services na denied sa kanila because of discrimination.
For that matter, should morality even enter the picture when we talk about sex work?
It is never okay to include morality talking about sex work because my definition of morality is very it comes from religion. For me lang, yan yung parang main source kung saan nabuo yung morality, sinasabi mo morality. And religion there's a freedom of religion in our country. Ang daming religions, although predominantly we are Catholic. And Christianity is in the Philippines for quite some time, 500 years. Then also marami ding coming from the Islam. But there are many religions in the Philippines, and no one is stopping you to identify with any religions available there. And you even have the right to not have religion if you want to. You can be atheist, you can be agnostic if you want. But let us please ensure na mayroong secularism because there should be a separation between state and religion. No, we should not allow religion and yung mga tao na paghuhugot ng morality nila based on their religion to impose that to other people because again we have freedom of religion, we have the right to identify with any religions available there. So I think that in order for us to be really modern at saka productive at the same time, we should not be allowing anyone, especially the state, to impose morality. Again, we are free. We have it is our basic right also to practice any belief that we want. And your morality is something that you should keep personal. Keep it to yourself, especially if it's harmful already to the rights of other people. You know.
Discussions on sex work in the Philippines neglect some populations, including LGBTQIA people. Why is sex work also an LGBTQIA issue?
That is correct. I would say that by default, when you say prostitute or sex worker, parang I would say majority would think na cisgender women lang siya. But it's not. It's a work na ang daming nag-i-engage, whether you're part of the LGBTQ community or not. It is becoming an LGBTQ common issue. For example, in the case of transgender people, specifically transgender women, maraming sex workers na transgender women. Because nga, ang transgender women is a very marginalized community. Isa sa mga pinaka-worst na naaapektuhan ng social oppression. In effect, mayroon siyang discrimination when it comes to education. Wala na masyadong access ang mga transgender women when it comes to education kasi schools in the Philippines are known to be enforcing or implementing non-transgender policies. For example, uniform policy or haircut policy. So these policies go against how many transgender people live their humanity. When it comes to sa employment level, aside from mahirap maghanap ng trabaho in the Philippines because hindi ka nakapag-access ng good education. Even if graduate ang isang transgender women, ang dami pa rin requirements ng mga employers, you know, and they are also implementing non-transgender policies as employers. So you can only work with us if you cut your hair short, if you stop wearing makeup, if you transform yourself to someone masculine looking, if you would wear these kinds of clothing, especially uniforms, you know, parang ganun, ang dami pa rin ini-impose na mga policies na nag-hinder for us to again enjoy our basic rights, right, to employment. So, ayun, in effect, maraming transgender women ang nagre-resort to sex work.
How do we make sure na when we talk of sex work in the Philippines, we include LGBTQIA voices?
In order for us to ensure na nasasali ang LGBTQ community sa usaping sex work, ay for the key actors or key organizations to study more about sex work in the Philippines. Because obviously, with what's going on right now, and yes, that's true, merong mga ongoing programs, initiatives maybe, na natatackle yung issues regarding sex work. But again, na-overlook ang ating community or ang LGBTQ community. Kasi nga, hindi masyadong ganyan kalalim ang kanilang understanding ng sex work in the Philippines. So they need to invest more para magkaroon ng mas comprehensive na knowledge about sex work so that by doing that, they would also identify na ay ang dami palang key affected populations sa usaping sex work, not just cisgender women. You know, ang dami palang other communities na vulnerable sa mga issues related to or negative issues related to sex work.
What should we expect or even demand from the LGBTQIA community regarding sex workers?
Well, I don't want to expect much, especially from a socially oppressed community such as the LGBTQ community na, you know, to really fight. Kasi fighting is tiring, tapos ang daming negative effects both physically and mentally sa isang socially oppressed community. So I could really understand why iba-iba ang stance, opinions, even people inside this community, the LGBT community, merong, let's say, pro-sex work, ang daming anti-sex work. So, hindi unified yung stand ng this particular community sa usaping sex work. But I really hope that you get some education, awareness, especially when it comes to sex work. Kasi ang dami mong mga kapatid na affected sa issue to, affected in a negative way. And open your heart and your mind, be empathetic, think of other people's situations. If you have privileges, good for you. I'm happy for you, but please remember that not all people gets to enjoy what we're enjoying. So ang daming ang daming part of your community, the LGBTQ community, ang nagsasuffer because of oppressors outside our community. Dumagdag ka pa when you are expected to be a sibling of that person coming from your own community.
Do you have any last words on this?
Last but definitely not the least, I hope that, or I'm urging the government to please maybe visit the existing policies or laws that we have, and please let us ensure na protected ang human rights ng ating mga kapatid na sex workers. Because whether they like the work or not, ang dami pa nating dapat malaman, ang dami pa nating dapat i-address ng mga issues related to sex work. So I really hope na as leaders, as public servants, na inelect ng mga tao, including sex workers, you would be reminded of your role. You will be reminded na it is your duty and responsibility to ensure na lahat ng Pilipino ay safe sa kanyang sariling bansa. Yun lang.
Abuso sa mga kababaihan o maging sa mga lalaki. Immoral ang pagkukuta. This benefits the traffickers, never the foot soldiers. Ang totoo, mahabang usapan pa ang dapat gawin to totally dissect this issue. But one thing is for sure, this is something we should not run away from. For instance, in July 2021, 11% of the new HIV cases in the Philippines involve people who engage in transactional sex. Mga taong nagbayad o nagpabayad para makapagtalik. And yes, this may be illegal in the Philippines, but this is already a fact of life. May mga Dota boys. May mga nag-o-offer at nag-avail ng massage with extra service. May mga nagbebenta at bumibili ng video call. May nangingibang bayan para magputa. These are all part of the sex industry. And if we do not tackle this, we end up punishing the sex workers whose rights should also be protected. Kaya dapat pag-usapan, talakayin, and that's what we are starting to do dito sa Bahaghari Talks.